KRUI 89.7, your sound alternative. This is Brian Dau. You're listening to The Lit Show every Sunday from 5 to 5:40 p.m. With me in the studio today is Sterling Schildt of the Fiction Workshop here at the university. Sterling, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
I guess just to start off with, maybe you could talk a little bit about your background, where you grew up when you began writing and that kind of thing.
I grew up on the Blackfeet reservation in northwest Montana. That's right on the east edge of Glacier Park. Lived most of my life there, except when I was going to school in Missoula to get my undergrad degree. I'm not sure what else to say. I mean, you know, I could go on for hours, I suppose, about like how that experience, the experience of growing up on a reservation is by and large apart from the rest of the country. But I won't.
Maybe you could talk just a little bit about, since the kind of the subjects you deal with and stuff seem very influenced by that background, kind of where you grew up and that kind of thing. Maybe you could talk about what inspired you to start writing about those things, or kind of how that began for you.
I think I knew that I wanted to be a writer when I was 19, but it took me about a decade to admit that to myself. And I was writing relatively consistently by my mid-20s, but it really wasn't until I read Sherman Alexie's first book of short stories that I realized you could actually write about the things that were familiar. I could write about the things that were familiar to me, because for the most part, obviously most fiction doesn't deal with that type of area or that type of experience. And so, the analogy I always use is, the way that they, as I understand it, you can, the way you deal with like an elephant in the circus is, if you get an elephant when it's a baby, and you tie it to a stake, and when it's a baby, it's not strong enough to pull that stake out of the ground, and you just keep tying it to that same stake, and so even by the time the elephant's full grown, it still doesn't think it can pull that stake out of there, because its experience has been so circumscribed by its that early stuff. And in the same way, like all of my reading really involved reading stories and novels about situations that were by and large like not familiar to me, and so my mind was kind of circumscribed in the same way until I read Sherman's first book, and then it was just everything opened up after that.
In that case, then, do you base the characters or events on real people or real things that have happened, or I guess I'm wondering how much maybe is fiction, where you kind of draw that line?
Even from the very beginning, when I wasn't writing about the subject matter I am now, I did everything I could to avoid writing about so-called real things and real people. For some reason, that always felt important to me, because what I realize now is that the more I write, if something is like direct experience of mine, it takes a long time for that to digest to the degree that I'm able to use it as like material for fiction. If it's too close to me or too immediate, then I can't write it, because it still feels like nonfiction in a way. That's how I approach it at this point. It's like my characters and my settings, like even the town that I'm writing about, it's not actually the real town. It's a place in my imagination that's sort of a conglomerate of, and the place and the characters and the things that are happening are conglomerates of my experience and stories I've heard and things that have gone on around me.
And maybe, I guess we can probably jump into the reading pretty shortly then. Is there anything you'd like to do to set it up? Is it something you've been working on recently, maybe how this story came about?
How did it come about? I was actually thinking about a Breeze Pancake story. He's a writer that most people don't know about. He died in like the late 70s, early 80s. He only had one book of short stories. He was from West Virginia, I think. And I was thinking about one of his stories, and something about that triggered like the initial image that this story starts with, and then it just went from there. And so I've been working on it for maybe 2 weeks, something like that.
All right, great. This is The Birth and Death and Birth of Ray First Sterling Schildt on KRUI 89.7.
The fall rain hammered down on everyone. It was the end of the third quarter, and the horn went off, 45-3, game over, slaughter rule. But I hadn't paid any attention since kickoff because there was June for the first time in 2 months. There was June at the other end, sitting next to that dyke lorry. June one row down, looking prettier since she'd moved just over the line to Blood Creek. She held a purple umbrella, silver raindrops running off, catching the light from the spotlights around the edge of the field, dripping onto her long, straight black hair because she was holding the umbrella too far forward. The crowd poured out through the main gate, and the umbrella went along the way a leaf is carried on a stream. Down the block under a busted streetlight, I caught up. Lori was already in her car, and June was shaking off the umbrella, her door open. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she said, like it had not been 2 months, and she had not moved over the line, and she was not probably getting it from a white boy. "Let's talk," I said. "I'd better not," she said. "Where are you going?" I said. "I'm going with Lori," she said. She looked down and smiled. The same as she did the first time I asked her if she would be my woman, and then waited 2 weeks and for me to ask 2 more times before she said okay, even though we both knew she would, because that was how it had to be. "Ray," Lori said, "get the hell out of here." "Shut your ass," I said. "She doesn't love you anymore," Lori said. "Too bad still nobody loves you," I said. "Ray," June said, "you should go now." She was looking at me in the way that she would, and I felt that the world was meant for us, turning around us. "How about I take you out sometime?" I said. The taillights disappeared into the darkness and the rain, and the sound of June saying goodbye turned over and over in my mind. I walked a few blocks home, past all the houses with blankets hanging over their windows in old low rent, yellow light shining through from inside. By the time I got to my house, my clothes were soaked through, my shoes heavy, but I didn't want to go in yet, so I headed for the graveyard. That was where I went to be alone and think. I would walk around and look at the carved names of the dead, or pick up the faded cloth flowers that had been scattered by the wind and feel their smooth petals between my fingers, or stop at one of the many graves that didn't have a headstone because the family couldn't afford it, and instead there was a rectangular tin plate with a number on it, like a small license plate. A block before the graveyard was Leroy's used auto, a small shack with a single window, a half-dozen cars with limp, still flags hanging from their antennas, a small-sized pickup with a flat front left tire, all of it lit up by a single green security light, and surrounded by a chain-link fence with barbed wire run around the top. I found myself leaning on the fence, taking a long look at that pickup, and those 4 numbers drawn huge and yellow across the windshield. Soon enough, I forgot the rain and the cold and the last few months, and all that was left was me and June. June had come from Bellevue, Washington, where her mother, Lola, was from. Lola was Blackfeet, a first runner, but she had grown up out there because her parents were moved out during relocation and decided to stay because coming back to LaFleur meant coming back to nothing. Those were the words of Lola's mother anyway, as I was told. "But I always wanted to come back here," Lola said, "even if Mom and Dad didn't want to. And even though I'd never lived here, I always knew this was home. I always knew this was where I belonged. Well, she had also come back because the white guy she was married to, June's father, had died on a construction site, and she had apparently only belonged here until she married another white guy and moved to Blood Creek, taking June with her. I loved June when I met her the summer before 5th grade, when she moved into the house across the street. Even then, a kind of light surrounded her, and when I was with her, that light was around me also, and my life was a different, better thing. I did not feel the first rumbles of something more than friendship, though, something more than teasing between us, until just before I started high school, and June started 8th grade, but we were not ready, so I used that first year to get ready, with Rita Johnson and Verna Delhomme, and June comes in last. They were all pretty girls, but next to June, they were like the first pale light of day before sunrise. I also spent my freshman year protecting her. LaFleur is a small place with few jobs and very little to do, and I learned early men who have nothing to do begin to scavenge like stray dogs, noses to the ground, and what they usually find first is a woman. So when school was out, I would walk the 5 blocks down to the middle school, and June would be waiting for me at the edge of the running track, and we would walk to her house together, and I would watch her go in through the door. During my game, she sat behind the bench. Otherwise, we sat together. My friends Calvin Bear and Nelson Blanket and Dwayne Mickelson and Lonnie Bigheart. Calvin, who moved away our junior year, and Nelson, who I see sometimes around town, and Dwayne, who lives on the street now, and Lonnie, who has been dead since the night of our senior kegger. All athletes, believed I had been sleeping with her since the start of that year, banging her, as they said, and I refused to say, when she was not an awkward thin stick with big eyes anymore, but a curved thing with the sudden eyes of a young woman. I can't say why I did not. I wanted to. I had some sense of rightness with her. I can't say where it came from. I would like to say that my friends stayed away from June out of respect to me, but there was more than one hallway confrontation between me and Nelson. And Dwayne always had a look in his eye when June was around. There was also an older guy, Lane Manykills. He had been a basketball star some years before I got into high school, leading scorer in Class A, invited to the state all-star game, and recruited by, I was told, a few D1 programs, both in Montana and out. I had grown up watching him play, and when I first picked up a ball, I had wanted to run down the court after a made shot like him, an easy look on my face, and had wanted the crowd to cheer for me the way it cheered for him, wild and loud. And by the fall of my sophomore year, I was first-string tight end, getting 8 catches and 60 yards a game on a team that couldn't figure out the snap count, and starting at the 4 on varsity during the winter, averaging 13 and 8, and in the spring running the 200 and the 400 and the 400 relay just to keep myself going. I was him. After he graduated, he spent a few years drinking and being thrown in jail, and by the time he became a teacher's aide at the high school, he was soft and shapeless where he had once been lean, and soon enough he was asking me about my friend June, something he did until one noon hour in senior hall, when I told him if he put a hand on her, I would lay him out, and he said, was I doing her? So I laid him out in the hallway with 2 hits. Before that, I had never seen a man slide 5 feet on his back across linoleum, or hitting his head on the lockers when he was done sliding. He did not speak to me or look me in the eye again, and the other guys who had been in senior hall to see it told the story to others. So everyone knew, and people teased me in a way that said they were respectful. 3 years later, the summer after my graduation, on the 4th of July, no less, June said she did not want to be with me anymore, and that her mother was getting remarried, and that the 2 of them were moving to Blood Creek to live with her new father-in-law. We were sitting above the floor on Bootleg Hill, listening and watching. A cloud of smoke hung over the town and caught the orange light of the streetlights below. I had just told her I wanted her to be my wife, and she had said no, and I had asked her why. It's not the same for me anymore, she said. I don't understand, I said. Me neither, she said. We were silent. Below us there was a boom, and a spray of green and pink and gold and white and orange sparks exploded and spread itself over the town. And when that had all faded, there were the short, broken bursts of firecrackers down in the streets, the screams of children. "I'll give you whatever you want," I finally said, because I had to say something, and because her last words had been proud, and I was confused. "How will you do that?" she said. In my youth and my ignorance, I thought she was talking about me almost not graduating, and about me deciding not to play ball at Montana State Galvin, a D2 school, so I could be closer to her, and about me not having a job. But years later, I would see that when she said it's not the same for me anymore, what she meant was a young woman's heart is like a bird that moves carelessly from tree to tree. And when she said, "Me neither," what she meant was 20 years from now we will see each other and wonder where our lives have gone. And when she said, "How will you do that?" what she meant was love and time and death are the same. I would fight against that moment on Bootleg Hill for the next 2 years, trying to cut her away from me the way a butcher cuts meat from the bone, and would tell myself for the 2 after that that I was finally done with her, and then for the 2 after that find myself bored with everything. And then on a calm fall morning when clouds hung low over the land and the sun above them glowed like a dim lamp and the aspen leaves had all turned red and orange and the cottonwood leaves had turned yellow and the air was thin and cool and good to breathe, I woke up from a dream I've never remembered and saw that somehow during that dream my life had unlocked and I was moving again, and my time with June had become less than a memory, and there was a kind of pain in that, but I was glad for it and tired. The morning after the game, I found my dad sitting in the kitchen reading the paper. I got myself a bowl of cereal and sat down. Whenever I ate cereal in the same room with my dad, I remembered that growing up he had eaten his with water because he had grown up on the res during a time when there was somehow even less money, and people would line up once a month at the commodities building to wait for their government-issued food. "I'm going to get a job," I said. "Well, isn't that something?" he said. He turned a page, rustled the paper. "I got to get June back," I said. "I thought that was over," he said. "I tried to make it that way," I said, "but she's all I want." "That ain't true," he said. He set the paper down. "Is that right?" I said. "You don't know anything about what you want," he said. "But you know," I said, "right?" "I know if it weren't for your mom, I would have already kicked you out that door," he said. "And how would you get me out?" I said. "I'd pick you up and throw you out," he said. "You won't ever touch me," I said. And we both knew it. Not because I was bigger, because I was, and not because I was stronger, because I wasn't, but because when I was 6, my dad had stopped drinking and he hadn't touched me or mom since. And laying a hand on me would be like collapsing a 13-year house of cards. After a walk through the gray afternoon, the air heavy and misty and damp, so that passing cars were like sounds in another room, and after I'd stood at the entrance to Larry's grocery watching people go in and out with their heavy brown bags, I went in and asked if they needed help, and the supervisor told me I was just in time. The afternoon guy hadn't shown up. He took me to a square back room. No windows, white walls, scraped up tile floor, a small square metal table, 2 metal folding chairs, all lit up by a single fluorescent bar hanging by chains from the ceiling. He told me to sit down and explained how things worked at Larry's. Paper or plastic, fruit and bread and eggs always on top, smile at the customers, no fooling around when things are slow. Help another bagger in another line, front some shelves. There's a bottle of Windex under each register. I nodded my head. I held on to his words the way you'd hold on to a treasure map. When he was done, he handed me a blue apron and welcomed me to Larry's, holding out one of his huge hands. Kevin, a big white guy with those spinach can forearms and glasses too small for his round face and his hair barely there, like a memory. The rest of the afternoon and the evening I spent at the end of a line, potatoes and eggs and oranges and cold packs of pop and beer and carrots and stalks of celery with their limp fringes hanging over the top edge of a paper bag. I smiled at the people who went through the line. My Uncle Hollis came through and I asked him about his cows. I joked with the other bagger, Romeo Nobody's gun. We laughed and felt good about things. Just before close, when things were slow and the other workers had eyes like the dead, I I caught a kid trying to steal some candy, a can of pop. I chased him outside and caught him in the parking lot, tackled him down in the middle of a puddle, and dragged him through the puddle on our way back inside. My heart was up. I was sure I was smiling. I'm sure I was smiling when I brought the kid to Kevin. He said I'd done good and told me to keep it up. There might be a bonus coming for me. After that, I helped clean up, and there was a kind of song in my heart while me and Romeo mopped the floors and fronted the shelves and shut off most of the lights. Meanwhile, the cashiers carried their tills to the back room where Kevin waited. On the walk home, the wind was blowing, and the air was still damp, so I ducked my head and shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and tried not to pay attention to the way my legs ached and my back ached and my neck was tight. I listened for the sound of cars splashing down the streets. I breathed in the cold air and told myself at the end of all of this was June, me and June. At the house, Dad and Mom were already in bed. I called June's place. I knew the number had been changed months before, after the last time I'd called at 3 a.m., but it was enough to hear the recording of the woman's voice telling me the number was disconnected, no longer in service.
That was Sterling Schildt reading from The Birth and Death and Birth of Ray Firsight on KRUI. Now, this story is like many of things you've written in that there's this kind of this tension between people that are on the reservation, people that are off the reservation, kind of, and the way they sort of interact. And I'm kind of wondering what role you see the reservation playing in the lives of your characters. It seems sort of complicated in the way that people who leave are kind of shunned by everyone on it, and yet the people who stay there kind of struggle with having a future and that kind of thing.
Where did you get that from?
Just
no, I'm kidding.
just guesswork, you know.
Yeah, well, one of the first things I discovered when I finally left the res and went to school in Missoula when I was 18 was that in a lot of ways the world off the reservation did not make sense to me, and I feel like I've spent the last 13 years trying to figure out what that means. I mean, what that meant and what it still means. It's very hard to verbalize. A lot of people in that grew up in Indian America, I guess I'll call it, have tried to talk about it, and I hear them talk about it, and it's kind of a universal experience for people that grow up on reservations, and I'm not even just talking about Indian people. I'm just talking about everyone that lives there. In a lot of ways, reservations are to me are more different from the U.S. than Canada is. They're like small countries inside of this country, only they're not recognized as such, and so it creates a lot of problems for people that that grow up in that environment, and I think most Americans don't ever have to deal with that because of simply because of the way where the United States is located on the globe. We really don't have very many neighbors. I think people in Europe have to deal with that constant jostling of different cultures and languages so much that they're in a lot of ways more accustomed to it than most Americans are. But if you took an American who had grown up in, I don't know, we'll say somewhere in Nebraska, and just put them in, I don't know, put them in another country somewhere. Say we'll put them somewhere in put them in Hong Kong, where people actually still speak English, but it would be the same. It would be the same experience of, I think, a similar experience of feeling completely out of place and not really knowing what to do about that. it's hard to leave, you know, but it's also hard to go back, because the more you leave, and the more your world expands, I think, and the more exposure you get to the things of the world, so to speak, the more a place like, you know, the reservation I'm from, in a lot of ways, feels very small and isolated, and away from that world, and so it just creates a lot of, it's a tension that's been there ever since the first Europeans showed up in North America and started moving west.
And for a few people in the stories, at least, there is this kind of opportunity presented that to them, you know, to get to leave the reservation. And like for in this story, Ray has the chance to go to college through a football scholarship. There's another character, Romeo, who could have been a boxer before he is put in the hospital. And so they often don't end up going through with it for, you know, one reason or another. I'm wondering what makes it, you know, kind of so difficult for a change to occur, for it to kind of get out of this this rut, I guess, that happens.
I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, if you grow up on a reservation, you grow up in a really, really strong community, and that has both like negatives and positives that go along with it. You know, communities can be a community like that can be really, really supportive. You know, if I were to go back, and I don't even know if it would be possible to do it, but you know, I've spoken with my dad before about this, and we probably have at least 3,000 blood relatives there, you know, out of like 8,000 people that live there, you know, I mean, and that's going out like third, fourth, fifth cousins, that sort of thing, but still, like, you grow up in an environment like that, and it's very insular in like both the best and worst ways, and so you grow up, and no matter where you go, people know you, and actually, they don't just know you, but they identify with you, because you're a relation, but that can also hold you back, you know, because that experience in this case is so particular that unless you go to another reservation in the U.S., you will not find that kind of feeling or that kind of community, and so you get stuck, I think, is what happens, yeah.
And I think that feeling of being stuck also really kind of relates to your writing. Often the perspective is from this. I mean, it's at least from what I've read, is always a male character, and they have this kind of, there's sort of this feeling of loss or kind of a lack of direction that they have, and I'm wondering if that's something that you feel like is sort of a general thing for Native American males, if that's something that kind of can often apply to them.
Yeah. I mean, I especially on the reservation. I've noticed that what I've been writing about lately has been, by and large, mostly like young young men, late teens, early 20s, because I suppose that's it's on my mind a lot lately, because all those the Indian kids that grow up on the reservation are you're put in a situation where because there's so little infrastructure there to receive you after high school, and just what we were talking about a moment ago, like if you leave and you get an education, by and large there are no jobs for you to come back to, and so it's not actually even feasible for you to come back. Not just that your experience is so much larger now, but even if I've met so many people who want to go back, but there's nothing there to receive them. There are no jobs. If you're not in the school system, or in like the tribal government system, or like the city government system, which isn't very much. There aren't very many jobs in that alone. If you're not in that, then you immediately go down to, like, you're working at the grocery store or the convenience store, and if you're not there, then there really aren't any jobs outside of that. And so, you know, these kids get out of high school, and if they're not college bound, then what do? Because it's not like you get down there and you get a job, because there really aren't jobs. And it's that period there from like 18 to like 20, I don't know, 22 or 23 is, I've noticed, is a really dangerous time in a person's life in general, because it's such a huge transition, and you're really going into adulthood like full force at that point. And but these kids are going into adulthood full force with nothing to receive them. It's sort of like you walk out that, you know, you graduate from high school and you walk out that door and there's nothing. And then what? And so I've found myself really compelled by that situation, I think.
And it also seems like there's that option of, you know, you mentioned the athletics and stuff, but it's such a lottery to actually have that as an option. I mean, so few people get to take that course. It seems like, you know, then if that doesn't happen, then what are you left with, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, and even then, you know, I mean, and it's almost become like I don't know, cliche is not the word, but an established pattern at this point that a lot of Indian athletes, there's a long history, even where I'm from, of, I guess I'll try to speak not quite so much in generalities, but just in the specifics of the Blackfeet reservation. There's already an established history of athletes, really, really astoundingly gifted athletes in every sport, getting major offers from major colleges all over the U.S., and they just don't go. They just don't go because it's changing a little bit now, just in the last 10 years, you know. But prior to that, most of them, I know some people personally. I've heard stories, and like they would get. There was one guy that my uncle would tell me about, who would. And he was in science class with him, and he was a cross-country runner, and he was like, I think he was, at the time, he was like either the top-ranked or one of like the top few ranked cross-country runners in the U.S., and he would get offers from Division I schools and at noon hour, you know, and he would come into science class after noon hour and like look at them and throw them in the trash. I mean, wouldn't even open them up, that sort of thing. And so that's, so even that as a route, in a lot of ways, hasn't been taken by a lot of people who could have taken it.
That's that's really interesting. There's I guess aside from the kind of cultural backdrop that you have in your fiction, I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about a story's most, you know, important function to you. Yes, I mean, what really draws you into a story?
You know, it used to be that the idea was the most important thing. Like I felt like I wanted to say something specific, or I had something to say. But the more I've written, the more I've discovered that that's actually a detriment to getting a story on the page, because somehow the story, in this very strange and kind of incomprehensible way, the story will find a way to tell itself if I allow that to happen as I'm writing it, and if I stick too closely to the idea that I begin with, then actually the story will die on the page very quickly. So, you know, what it's become now, rather than an idea or like a message, you know, in that sense, it's become more of like I will get an image, or I'll hear a voice. And I'll hear a character speaking about his or her life, and it usually begins like that, and typically there's a conflict right there at the start, and if that's the case, then things are able to sort of unfold on their own.
And maybe, since you come from I guess a slightly different background than some writers, or at least a somewhat unique background. I'm wondering what authors you count as kind of influences and who you really admire.
I mean, like I said, like I don't even know if I would be writing right now if I hadn't read Sherman Alexie. I feel like, by and large, I owe a ton to him for writing what he has. While at the same time, like, I don't think our visions necessarily line up with one another, and so there's him. But then also just really basic, normal stuff. I read Hemingway for a long time. I love Faulkner, Cormac McCarthy. I guess those would be the basics right now. That where I'm coming from in terms of influence.
Well, looks like we're about out of time. Maybe just to wrap up, do you is this kind of work, that the stuff that you're working on right now, something you hope to maybe bring together into a collection? Do you see it as all connected?
Yeah, I do. I think what connects it ultimately is just that reservation, and eventually I have some stories that are going to be written about characters who didn't grow up there, but are nonetheless like still very much like connected to that place, because that's been my experience. So is that even people, they're Blackfeet tribal members who didn't grow up there and maybe grew up in Seattle or Portland, and nonetheless, like, their bloodlines go, one generation back, go directly to there, and so they still have a really strong connection to that place anyway. And so, yeah, I think that what will eventually tie the stories together is just that place.
Well, it's been really great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming by and talking to me.
Thank you, man.
All right, well, just a quick reminder, if you want to see an updated schedule of the show, http://litshow.wordpress.com. That's all the time that we've got this week. So until next week, I'm going to turn over to Aaron and Brian for the comic book show. Thanks for listening to KRUI 89.7, your sound alternative.